ahead? Well, as airlines feel the financial pinch with jet fuel prices soaring, many holidaymakers here in Europe are anxious about how to plan their summer breaks. Low-cost carriers, which control a little more than a third of the global market, aren't waiting for a lack of supplies to react and have already begun to cut services. Selena Sykes has the story.
It's the fear of all holidaymakers, opening a text or email with the news that their flight is cancelled. It's something that the International Air Transport Association is telling travellers to prepare for amid the ongoing jet fuel crisis sparked by war in the Middle East.
The concern, however, is that as we get closer to the peak summer period in the Northern Hemisphere, that the shortfall in supply will mean that there will be a shortage of jet fuel in some places. It's going to impact globally, but in particular it will affect Asia, Europe.
Jet fuel prices have doubled since the conflict broke out at the end of February. IATA has warned that there is no way airlines can absorb the massive increase and will have to pass on the added cost to customers or cancel less profitable flights. That's already the case for some budget airlines. Lufthansa announced the cancellation of 20,000 European short-haul flights over the summer, while Transavia has cancelled 2% of its flight schedule for May and June. Amid increasing concern, France's Minister of Economy is planning a meeting with the Transport Minister and airlines ahead of peak season this summer. In the meantime, he had words of reassurance.
We import just over 20% of our jet fuel from the Gulf, so naturally we've been keeping a close eye on the situation from the very beginning. We said there wouldn't be a shortage in April, and there wasn't one. And what I can tell you today is that I'm not worried about May either.
The French government has said it currently has a 3-month strategic reserve.
Well, for more, let's bring in John Gradek, faculty lecturer in aviation management and supply chain management at McGill University. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme, John. So despite these warnings of potential jet fuel shortages, the head of Ryanair said today that the risk of a supply crunch is actually receding. So which is it, and how concerned should people be about booking holidays this summer?
Should be. I think that, it doesn't matter what our friends at Ryanair are making a statement. I'm going to put my faith into the International Energy Association's forecast of, it was 6 weeks last week. It is now, as of today, 5 weeks worth of fuel that's left. So I think that there is an action taken by some governments to have the conversation. I think France was really, ahead of the game by getting transportation and logistics in place to kind of manage their reserve. But the impact will be on short-haul flights within Europe first. And if anybody's got reservations, please be prepared for a Plan B or Plan C, because the odds of short-haul flights being cancelled in June and July are increasing every day.
And what rights do passengers actually have in that event if their flights are cancelled? Does it depend on the airline or the provider or the individual laws that are in place wherever they've booked those trips?
Yeah, the EU 261 regulations stipulate that the carriers have to provide alternative transportation in the event of a cancellation outside of 14 days of flight. So that's fine if there's a problem with your carrier or a given aircraft type. The problem is if the industry decides to shut down, there are going to be fewer alternative flights, not only on your own carrier, but on the other carrier. So I think that what we're going to be seeing is a process where the carriers canceling short-haul flights will be looking to rail service to be able to provide alternative transportation to those passengers. So whether it's rail, whether it's bus transportation, I think those are the only options left, because airlines will not be able to get fuel because it's not a question of price, it's a question of product availability.
And John, we've heard lots of warnings over the last few weeks since the war began, really, here in Europe. But what regions are going to be worst affected by all of this if the worst does actually happen?
I think the worst is already happening in Asia. I think if you're looking at the Asian Pacific Rim, so places from Korea, it's not so bad, but Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Manila, Kuala Lumpur, we're already seeing a number of aircraft being parked. We're seeing some layoffs, particularly in Vietnam. where there is a rationing of fuel, where we not only jet fuel, but also gasoline and diesel. So, those countries are starting to feel the effects as we speak. It's going to start cascading through Australasia and now into Western Europe in the next 4 or 5 weeks. So, we're going to have situations where the general economy is going to be affected. So it's not only aviation fuel that will be hitting some limits. It's going to be diesel as well. Diesel might be a couple of months behind it, but the question is going to be, when is the Strait of Hormuz going to open up? When we're going to get these, ships moving aviation fuel and other petroleum products? And it's going to take time, and we're going to be in this situation for at least a few months.
And let's say, for example, then that the situation started returning to normal around now in terms of the Strait of Hormuz opening. How long do you think? You're saying that it could last months, even into next year, perhaps? These kind of problems, this crisis that we're seeing in the aviation sector, and these concerns that passengers have about their future plans.
Yeah, I think that, my nightmare scenario is that the major refineries in the Gulf area that were producing aviation fuel and diesel fuel may have been damaged by attacks in the first few weeks of this conflict. And if that damage is significant to those refineries, and nobody knows just as yet what that damage is, those refineries need to get online pretty quickly. It may take months, it may take a year to get those refineries back up and running to pre-conflict production levels. So this could last, through early 2027. So it might be pretty devastating for the industry. So, you'll probably see some carriers that will not be able to stomach the disruption. And, and I think IATA and Mr. Walsh has been mentioning that there's a number of carriers that are at risk. And so I've heard carriers such as Wizz Air, Air Baltic, saying that, we might be in a situation where we can't afford to fly with the price of fuel the way it is. And it's not going down anywhere, it's going up. So it could be in trouble.
And John, just finally, what kind of lessons does the industry need to learn, and governments as well, particularly here in Europe and in Asia, following this crisis to better protect themselves in the future?
My favorite saying in my classroom is never let a good crisis go to waste. So we have to learn. And the airline industry is pretty good at learning from incidents and accidents and all kinds of stuff that happen, and we change practices and procedures. This one we haven't seen before. This is the first time the industry has faced this type of crisis. And it's something that I think that when you see that level of crisis, you try to figure out, so what do? We have to look at alternative supplies. And I think the industry has an alternative, called sustainable aviation fuel that is derived from biomass, derived from CO2, derived from plastics. And we've been hesitant in really investing and producing that type of fuel because of the price difference between aviation fuel and this new sustainable aviation fuel. And so that gap has now been closed substantially. So now the price of aviation fuel is creeping up to the price of sustainable aviation fuel. That should give the incentive to producers to basically increase the level of production of sustainable aviation fuel as a substitute, and maybe even as an additive to aviation fuel. So that's something we should be doing very, very quickly.
Turbulent times ahead, it seems, John, by all accounts. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme. That's John Gradek, Faculty Lecturer in Aviation Management at McGill University.